Welcome back to the Daily Bible Study. Today we're going to be looking at Acts chapter 16, verse 35 through Acts chapter 17, verse 21. Acts 16:35 through 17:21. And we begin with the Apostle Paul, who was in, you remember he was in jail, he was in prison, even though the jailer had believed and been baptized. He didn't let Paul go, of course, because that would have meant his life, and Paul knew that. So Paul was still in jail the next morning. And it says, when it was day, the magistrate sent the police, saying, "Let those men go." And the jailer reported these words to Paul, saying, "The magistrates have sent to let you go. Therefore come out now and go in peace." But Paul said to them, "They've beaten us publicly, uncondemned men who are Roman citizens, and thrown us into prison. And do they now throw us out secretly? No, let them come themselves and take us out." This is one of the things I find very interesting about this portion of the story and other places in the book of Acts, is that the Apostle Paul was often willing to use his position as a Roman citizen for his benefit. You see, these men had taken him, had beaten him. He was uncondemned by the law, yet he was condemned by these people. And him being a Roman citizen, that was definitely a dangerous thing for them to do. You didn't just go around and condemn Roman citizens at that time, because they were under the protection of Rome. So here he has been under the protection of Rome, or supposed to have been, and wasn't. They've beaten, put him in jail, and now they're wanting to put him away secretly. And he said, "No, do it out in the open. Let people know what you did. Let people know how wrong it was." And it's kind of an interesting little political thing you have going here. Paul's trying to show that what they're doing is absolutely wrong, and in a way, I think that he's allowing for protection for the next group. You know, whoever else is going to be following him up in ministry, maybe they won't be so quick to condemn someone next time without due process. So Paul and Silas at that point departed. Chapter 17, verse 1. Now when they passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And Paul went in, and as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead, saying, "This Jesus whom I proclaim to you is the Christ." And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews were jealous, and taking some wicked men of the rabble, they formed a mob, set the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason, which of course was where Paul and Silas must have been staying. So here we have this issue of jealousy again. Paul and Silas are gaining for themselves a following, but it's not following Paul and Silas, it's following the gospel. It's following the message that they're teaching about Jesus Christ. And the Jews are angry about this. They are in an uproar about this, and they just continually are causing a problem. You notice in verse 13, Paul and Silas went to Berea. And in Berea it says, but the Jews from Thessalonica learned that the word of God was being proclaimed at Berea, and they came there too, agitating and stirring up the crowds. This is what people do who are opposed to the truth. They try to create this mob mentality. They try to create this overwhelming sense of unity opposing the truth. And they use propaganda, they use whatever they can to stir up a problem. Here's what I want to note today, though, from the text, and this is a very important part of the text that I don't want anyone to overlook. Going back to verse 11, remember Paul and Silas had gone to Berea. It says in verse 11, "Now these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word with all eagerness, examining the Scriptures daily to see if these things were so." That is chapter 17, verse 11. That passage is so important in regards to how we, as Christians, are to examine every teaching that we receive. We are to be Bereans in the teaching that comes to us. because we are supposed to not just accept something because some preacher on television says it, not just accept something because we read it on the internet or hear it on YouTube, not just accept something because someone says, God told me, but we are to take all of the teaching that we hear and examine it by the measuring rod of the Scriptures. Examine the Scriptures and see if the things we are hearing are so. We ought to be Bereans in our faith. As it says here, they were more noble. Why were they more noble? Because they stood on the Word of God. Finally, starting in verse 16, it says, Now while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, What does this babbler wish to say? Others said, He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. For you, bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean. Now, this place, the Areopagus, that Paul is being pulled into, that he is being led to, is a place where philosophers would go and discuss their latest ideas and the ideas of old, and they would begin debates there, and they would have discussions. And Paul is being pulled in to the place where people go to have conversations about life and about philosophy. And the way Paul addresses this subject is so important for us today, because the way Paul presents the gospel is the way we ought to be presenting the gospel to those who have never heard it and have been brought up in a humanistic and worldly philosophy. Now, the next Bible study we have tomorrow, I'll be examining some of what Paul uses, some of the arguments he uses for the gospel against those who, you remember, have never heard it, never heard anything like it, and where he begins and where he goes in his message. So stay tuned for that. That'll be up tomorrow. And again, if you have any questions about what we've talked about today, about the message that I've brought here, or if you just want to send an email of encouragement, the email address is mkfoskey, MKFOSKEY, @yahoo.com. God bless, and we'll see you again here on YouTube.